Folks often rave about the P-51 Mustang for its crucial role in rescuing the strategic bombing operations and clinching dominance in Europe's skies. And they're right, it absolutely did. Yet what escapes most people's notice is that securing aerial superiority actually kicked off the toughest ordeal for Mustang pilots, far from signalling the finish line. The fact is, almost 80% of Mustangs destroyed in the conflict fell victim not to hostile planes, but to an entirely different threat, and you're on the verge of grasping the reason. This is the overlooked tale of the iconic P-51 Mustang. Let's dive in from the outset. As World War II erupted, the US Armed Forces held a precise vision for aviation's role. They viewed fighters and bombers as wholly distinct tools, each suited to unique purposes. Fighters, still dubbed pursuit planes by Americans deep into the 1940s, served as defensive assets, tasked mainly with blocking enemy bombers from striking US soil. Bombers, by contrast, formed the attacking spearhead. The Army Air Force's whole strategy rested on the conviction that squadrons of heavy bombers could penetrate far behind enemy lines, cripple industries and vital systems, and claim victories without the grueling infantry battles that scarred World War I. This approach stemmed from the doctrine of daylight precision bombing, crafted in the 1930s. The US dismissed the British tactic of nocturnal area raids, confident that the Norden bomb site would enable pinpoint strikes on factories from lofty heights. Even more critically, they trusted the B-17 Flying Fortress, equipped with as many as 13.50 caliber machine guns, to fend off enemy interceptors during massed flights. Developing a genuine, long-range escort fighter barely crossed serious minds, since many experts deemed it unfeasible back then. Thus, in 1943, the United States Army Air Forces unleashed their European bombing offensive, operating out of bases in England, grounded in this philosophy. Yet by midsummer, that philosophy lay shattered amid the flaming debris of B-17S strewn over rural Germany. Bomber self-protection proved utterly ineffective. Casualty figures soared to 8% per sortie that spring, and come fall, the campaign was hemorrhaging planes at an unsustainable pace for any army. The typical B-17's operational lifespan shrank to a mere 11 sorties. With those attrition levels, odds of surviving the mandatory 25 mission tour hovered around 14%. Take a second to let that hit home. Out of every 10 airmen venturing into German airspace, 8 would end up killed, vanished, or in custody. That's the harsh reality. In the infamous Black Week, 2/3 of the B-17S dispatched on perilous runs into the Reich either got downed or returned so wrecked they were grounded for good. Scores of air crews perished, while hundreds more bailed out over hostile ground and wound up prisoners. Analysts figured that at this clip, they'd need to rebuild the entire bomber fleet nearly every 3 months to sustain operations. The clear fix? Provide fighter escorts. And the Allies did have some in England. The P-47 Thunderbolt showed up early in 1943, with the P-38 Lightning slated next, but each had severe drawbacks that blocked a real fix. The British Spitfire faced identical hurdles. No such planes could push far enough into Germany to shield bombers at their most vulnerable spots. The P-47 Thunderbolt held 305 gallons of onboard fuel, yet its huge radial engine guzzled about 100 gallons hourly at fighting thrust. That limited its internal fuel combat radius to only 165 miles. Introducing 75-gallon drop tanks in 1943 stretched the P-47's reach to Germany's western edge, roughly 250 miles from bases in England. But Berlin sat some 600 miles distant. Escorting bombers that deep while reserving fuel for battle was out of the question. Drop tanks offered a promising workaround, and ultimately they did. The idea was straightforward. Attach extra tanks to the wings or belly, consume their contents up front, discard the empties pre-engagement. Still, drop tanks by themselves couldn't overcome the core issue. The the P-47 simply consumed too much. One estimate revealed the Thunderbolt needed around 260 gallons for a 600-mile trip, whereas the Mustang required just 108 gallons over the identical span. So, the plane that would later rescue the air offensive was already stacking up well against rivals. But right then, it hadn't yet taken its ultimate shape, and that's when the narrative takes a surprising twist. The plane that would transform everything emerged for an entirely unrelated purpose. 3 years prior to the devastating bomber casualties in early 1940, Britain grappled with severe deficits in fighter planes and struggled to keep up with manufacturing demands independently. They turned to an American firm, North American Aviation, requesting licensed production of P-40 Warhawks to bridge the shortfall. Yet North American proposed something superior. They assured the British they could create and construct a fresh fighter superior to the Warhawk, which was already outdated, all within the time frame required to adapt their facilities for Warhawk assembly. They vowed to supply this innovative fighter in fewer than 120 days, a remarkably brief period for an untested endeavour. Remarkably, they surpassed their own target, completing the prototype in merely 102 days. What North American unveiled was a sleek, aerodynamically refined fuselage that slashed drag by nearly half relative to contemporary rivals. It outperformed all peers equipped with the identical power plant in speed. Still, the power plant proved to be the Achilles heel. The prototype featured the liquid-cooled Allison engine, generating about 1,000 horsepower. However, this unit excelled at lower and mid-level altitudes. At the elevations where bombers flew, usually beyond 20,000 feet, its performance plummeted sharply. Due to these constraints, the initial Mustang failed to emerge as a viable fix for escorting bombers. The debut Mustang sent to England handled low-altitude strikes against ground targets and scouting operations. They managed to strike into German territory from British bases at reduced heights. But that marked the extent of the Mustang's capabilities then. It was a capable machine, hampered by an unsuitable engine for the critical task. Then, in April 1942, a pivotal event unfolded that altered the course. Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker got the opportunity to pilot the Mustang, now in Royal Air Force service. Harker admired the plane, recognised its flaws, and conceived a bold notion. He suggested equipping the Mustang with the potent Merlin engine powering the latest Spitfire, believing it would unleash the aircraft's full capabilities. Initially, officials resisted fiercely as the Merlin was fully committed to British designs with no surplus available. Ultimately, they relented for a trial, installing a Merlin in an experimental Mustang alongside Rolls-Royce's new two-stage supercharger and a four-bladed propeller. The outcome stunned all involved. The Merlin-fitted Mustang climbed to 40,000 feet and hit 433 miles per hour. The key was that this power plant sustained its output at heights where the Allison faltered completely. With these findings, Merlin production ramped up under license in the US, and manufacturing of this groundbreaking Mustang version accelerated. Early models mounted 4, later 6, .50 caliber machine guns, carrying 1,880 rounds total. Subsequent variants introduced the bubble canopy, eliminating the visibility obstructions from earlier enclosed designs that hindered pilots in aerial combats. Yet the standout feature was endurance. The Mustang's expanded onboard fuel tanks, paired with superior efficiency, provided unmatched reach among fighters of the era. Finally, the missing element fell into place. The auxiliary drop tanks previously tested on other aircraft now graced the Mustang. Fitted with two 108-gallon drop tanks, the P-51B extended beyond 1,000 miles round trip. This sufficed to journey to Berlin, shield bombers over objectives, clash with German defenders, and return while hitting incidental targets en route. The answer to the bomber peril had materialized at last. For the aviators tasked with flying it, though, the toughest challenges lay ahead. The initial Merlin-equipped Mustangs arrived in Europe by November 1943 and dove into action immediately. The 354th Fighter Group obtained them first, with the 8th Air Force promptly commandeering the planes for escort roles amid urgent demands. Soon, the Mustang eclipsed both the P-38 and P-47 in deployment numbers. Squadrons throughout the force raced to transition to the newcomer, sometimes at breakneck speed that bordered on recklessness. Certain pilots mastered the Mustang mid-flight to their objectives. Airmen with under a day's familiarization suddenly found themselves guiding bombers far into German airspace, facing hostile fighters. So, in what way did these operations truly unfold? What did a standard escort mission from England to Germany and return entail? Such operations generally took 4 to 6 hours in total. Missions kicked off in the pre-dawn hours with detailed briefings, where pilots received intel on the objective, the path to link up with the bomber formation, and anticipated resistance. Afterward, they donned bulky flying outfits, including fleece-lined jackets, sturdy boots, and insulated gloves, as the chill at 25,000 feet could plummet to -40 degrees. Departures occurred in waves, with the fighters assembling over English soil prior to crossing the English Channel. Entering enemy airspace turned those hours into a tense endurance test. Crews kept a close eye on fuel levels while vigilantly searching the heavens for hostile interceptors and the bombers under their guard. Handling fuel demanded meticulous attention and adhered to a strict protocol. The main fuselage reservoir had to be depleted soon after launch, since a full load pushed the plane's balance point too far aft, rendering the Mustang prone to instability. The norm was to drain that tank substantially before anticipating engagement. Spotting foes prompted an immediate jettison of the wing-mounted drop tanks via a quick lever pull, sending them spiralling away. These auxiliary pods generated unwanted resistance and hampered tight maneuvers, making them a liability in a furball. With the skirmish underway, shedding them allowed the plane to rely solely on onboard reserves, restoring its peak maneuverability. Dogfights erupted in short, ferocious bursts, often wrapping up in mere minutes or even seconds. Aviators recalled the frenzy as overwhelming in real time, as they strained to follow hurtling planes while aware of adversaries doing likewise. The .50 caliber guns packed immense punch, yet hitting a twisting foe called for pinpoint precision. The cumulative strain mounted relentlessly. Prolonged confinement in a tight cockpit amid thin air, reliant on oxygen masks, biting frost, and the post-battle surge of fatigue all fueled profound weariness. Casualties among comrades turned commonplace, with certain squadrons suffering over 50% losses just in 1944. It's worth noting Major George Preddy, the war's top Mustang ace with 27 confirmed kills. Preddy endured endless aerial clashes to emerge as the most lethal P-51 operator overall. Yet on December the 25th, 1944, amid the Battle of the Bulge, while pursuing a German aircraft near the deck, US flak crews misidentified his Mustang as hostile. They unleashed a barrage, downing him. Struck by .50 caliber fire that nicked his femoral artery, Preddy probably blacked out mid-descent. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe grappled with self-inflicted woes. Their squadrons had devoted months to optimizing for bomber intercepts, and finding initial weapons inadequate against B-17S, they beefed up the arsenal. BF-109S gained 20mm cannons slung beneath the wings. FW-190S pushed boundaries with models boasting 4 such cannons alongside twin heavy MGS. Specialized anti-bomber types even sported 30mm guns or rudimentary rockets. This boosted lethality shredded big 4-engine fortresses efficiently. However, the surplus ordnance brought extra mass and aerodynamic penalties, transforming agile hunters into lumbering beasts. The Mustang's mass deployment spelled catastrophe for the Germans. Above 20,000 feet, the P-51 outclassed these burdened foes in turns and climbs. Concurrent shifts in US tactics amplified the effect, shattering the Reich's aerial might. Earlier, escorts hugged the bomber boxes, repelling assailants without chase. The Luftwaffe capitalized by lurking until the guards peeled off for range reasons, then pouncing. The revamped approach from early 1944 sent Mustangs 50 to 100 miles out front, sweeping threats ahead of the heavies' path. Post-target coverage allowed pursuits of retreating Germans, low-level strikes on bases, and opportunistic hits en route back. Bombers' crews initially resented the distance, craving tight protection, yet the impact proved ruinous. Operation Big Week in February 1944 zeroed in on German plane plants, luring the Luftwaffe into the fray. Defenders climbed to shield the sights, only to slam into Mustang ambushes. The Luftwaffe hemorrhaged 355 aircraft that week, halving their active force. Recovery proved impossible. Desperation cut flight training from 300 hours to barely 75 to man the machines. Come early 1944, Germany churned out roughly 26 fresh aviators monthly versus America's 29,000 for the year. Inexperienced German flyers faced off against US servicemen perished in droves during those battles. The Germans faced even greater hardships due to severe fuel shortages. By the spring of 1945, the Luftwaffe had virtually vanished from the skies. Yet there remained a single plane that US aviators were instructed to steer clear of no matter what: the Messerschmitt RME-262, the first jet fighter to see real action, and the deadliest weapon the Luftwaffe ever deployed. It could hit speeds around 530 miles per hour, nearly 100 miles per hour quicker than the Mustang, and its 430mm cannons could shred a B-17 bomber in moments, not to mention a nimble Mustang. Orders were clear. Don't tangle with it without the element of surprise or a substantial edge in height. Still, the jet had its flaws. Its innovative engines were delicate and struggled to gain speed at lower velocities. Lu-S flyers adapted by lurking around suspected Me-262 airfields, ambushing the jets as they descended for landing, sluggish and exposed. Even with a handful of standout victories by German jet aces, the Me-262 arrived too late and in insufficient quantities to matter. Just around 1,400 were produced, with under 300 engaging in combat. You might assume that with the Luftwaffe crumbling and the jets unable to alter the war's course, Mustang crews could finally relax a bit. But the reality was far grimmer. The riskier stretch of their service was only starting. As hostile aircraft faded from the airspace, the focus shifted to low-level attacks on ground objectives, and we'll explain exactly why this proved infinitely more perilous than dueling German planes. Consider this statistic. When a P-47 Thunderbolt got hit, about 8 in 10 limped back to base. For the P-38 Lightning, the figure stood at 7 in 10. The Mustang, however, managed only 6 in 10 after taking damage. Losses from ground fire claim P-51s at nearly triple the rate of the air-cooled P-47. The key difference lay in the Mustang's liquid-cooled Merlin engine, which relied on a flawless cooling setup to operate. From the coolant jacket and radiators to the connecting pipes, everything had to remain undamaged. One stray round piercing any part would cause the fluid to leak, leading to rapid overheating and engine failure. The flyer might squeeze out 10 to 20 minutes of flying time, but if base was beyond that range, survival odds plummeted. By contrast, the P-47's air-cooled radial power plant protruded forward like a massive 2,400-pound fortress of steel and alloy. Without vulnerable cooling lines to hit, it even doubled as armour for the plane. If you're curious about the sheer volume of German defences aimed skyward, the scale was immense. Their flak units included over 1 million troops manning some 9,000 heavy weapons, primarily 88mm flak cannons. plus 30,000 lighter pieces in 20mm and 37mm sizes. Rail lines turned into death traps, fitted with specialised flak rail cars often grouped in pairs or fours. To strike a surface target, a pilot had to maintain a steady, level flight path below 500 feet for accurate sighting, aiming and shooting. But that predictability handed gunners an easy opportunity against a plane with limited evasion options. Attempting a follow-up run on the same spot was basically suicidal, as defenders could anticipate the trajectory perfectly. At such heights, escape via parachute was impossible. Struck at 200 feet, a pilot lacked the seconds to jettison the canopy, bail out, deploy the chute, and avoid smashing into the earth. Out of about 2,500 P-51s destroyed in the conflict, roughly 550 were verified as downed by foe aircraft. The other 80% or so succumbed to flak, mishaps during strafing runs or breakdowns. For those who ejected and survived the crash, fresh nightmares awaited. From 1943 onward, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels unleashed a smear campaign, swapping neutral terms like pilot or aircrew for inflammatory labels such as Terrorflieger, Terrorflyers, and Luftgangster, air gangsters. The rhetoric portrayed Allied aviators as lawless thugs hunting bounties on innocent lives. That August, Heinrich Himmler directed SS and police to stand aside during clashes between civilians and captured airmen. In essence, it greenlit the slaughter of any Allied crew drifting down by parachute over enemy land. Records show at least 3,000 instances of mob executions, with more than 1,000 Allied airmen murdered outright. Those who evaded the crowds and entered POW camps endured brutal conditions. Numerous liberated airmen at war's close tipped the scales at under 90 pounds. Yet once European operations halted, the conflict persisted, and so did the Mustang saga. Far away in the Pacific, an entirely new menace loomed, unrelated to dogfights or flak barrages. Securing Iwo Jima in March 1945 transformed the P-51's role dramatically. This small, volcanic speck lay 790 miles south of Tokyo, and with it under US control, the Japanese homeland at last fell within fighter range. Although it stretched their capabilities to the limit, the operation's launch from Iwo Jima earned a reputation as ultra-long-range endeavours, ranking among the toughest aerial sorties of the whole conflict. The inaugural such mission took off on April 7, 1945, with 96 Mustangs providing cover for 100 B-29's targeting sites on Honshu. Japanese interceptors climbed to engage, and in the ensuing dogfights, Mustang crews reported downing 21 foes. At first glance, it appeared the Pacific skies would deliver the same intense air battles that airmen had faced in Europe. Yet these outings differed radically from any prior experience. A full journey from Iwo Jima to the vicinity of Tokyo and return spanned about 1,500 miles, mostly across vast expanses of sea. Navigation offered no visual cues, no towns, no terrain features, just endless ocean stretching out for hours. In European operations, a minor heading mistake might land you over the incorrect village. But in the Pacific, such a slip could result in vanishing forever. Even a 1-degree deviation in course might leave a flyer circling until fuel exhaustion, with only waves visible below. To aid pilots who ditched, the armed forces set up air-sea rescue systems for a shot at survival. Subs positioned at regular intervals dotted the sea. Destroyer escorts cruised the area. B-29s conducted offshore sweeps, and Catalina amphibians waited on standby for recovery ops. These measures rescued numerous crewmen who might have been lost otherwise, though plenty more perished too distant from aid or simply evaded timely detection. By the summer of 1945, Japanese planes seldom rose to contest the escorts anymore. Their air arms, Army and Navy alike, had been decimated, leaving behind green recruits who stood no chance. The sparse dogfight victories in those closing weeks were lopsided affairs. Still, danger never abated. The deadliest day ever for the P-51 Mustang unfolded on June 1, 1945, forever dubbed Black Friday. That dawn, 184 Mustangs departed Iwo Jima to shield B-29s striking Osaka. Recon flights had indicated a weather front approachable at 10,000 feet, but the forecast failed badly, thrusting the formation into a colossal tempest. No path above or detour possible, aviators plunged into darkness with visibility near zero, battered by fierce buffeting, frost, hail and downpours. Groups shattered on contact, planes flying wingtip to wingtip seconds before now scattered in the turmoil, unable to regroup. Mid-air crashes started happening within the squadrons. Many aviators eventually swung around toward home, but the toll was already heavy. 27 Mustangs were lost that day, claiming 24 lives, with just one chalked up to hostile fire. Nature took the others. This marked the heaviest toll in a single P-51 mission across both theatres, and the enemy bore scant blame. The pattern persisted through the war's end. From July 1st to August 15, 1945, 85 US fighter pilots perished on these extended hauls, a mere few to combat. The ocean's unforgiving vastness, mechanical glitches, or human slip-ups, plus brutal conditions, accounted for the majority. When the ultimate sortie lifted off on August 14th, the VLR effort had exacted more than 130 Mustangs and their aviators. Arguably, the most poignant coda to the Mustang's role in World War II came in this tale. First Lieutenant Felix Philipp Schlamberg, a 19-year-old Jewish valedictorian from Brooklyn, found himself inexplicably at Iwo Jima, piloting P-51S as the conflict wound to its close. That evening of August 14th, 1945, he joined his squadron mates in a Quonset hut for the pre-mission rundown. The A-bombs had already devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, rendering Japan's capitulation imminent, perhaps mere hours away. Rather than halt operations, however, orders came to gear up for a dawn strike. Targets: air bases outside Tokyo. Leading the group, Captain Jerry Yellen later recounted how Schlamberg, during the session, bent close and murmured a premonition that this flight would be his last. Yellen suggested consulting the medic for a medical waiver, but Schlamberg demurred. Come morning on August 15th, 1945, as Emperor Hirohito taped his capitulation from a Tokyo recording room, Yellen and Schlamberg roared skyward from Iwo Jima. Unaware of the armistice, they pressed on. The recall signal, Quote 5, never crackled over their sets. Spotting their objectives, the pair raked the fields with cannon fire as briefed, drawing flak during withdrawal. Pulling up sharply to evade, they pierced a dense cloud layer. Yellen emerged clear on the far side, but Schlamberg trailed behind no more. Yellen orbited and scanned, to no avail. Fuel dwindling, retreat was his only option. Back at Iwo Jima upon touchdown, word arrived. Peace had reigned for 3 hours. What H will never know exactly what happened to Philipp Schlamberg. Perhaps he lost his bearings amid the clouds, or maybe anti-aircraft fire struck his plane. Neither his remains nor the aircraft were ever recovered. At just 19, he had a premonition that this mission would be his last. He became the final American casualty in World War II combat, vanishing during what proved to be the nation's ultimate operation in that grueling conflict. By the war's close, production had reached almost 15,000 Mustangs. The plane continued operating long after the battle ceased. Then, when the Korean War broke out in 1950, these fighters were dusted off from reserves and redeployed as the F-51 for ground support roles. Their impressive range remained valuable for sorties launched from Japanese airfields. Yet by then, the Mustang was outdated. Soviet MiG-15 jets surpassed it entirely. And come 1953, jet fighters dominated the skies, ending the Mustang's era of frontline duty. Those that endured transformed into prized possessions for collectors, meticulously refurbished and showcased at aviation events, traded among aficionados for sky-high prices. People who'd never faced the terror of battle in one. It's sobering to reflect on the raw purpose those machines once served, prior to their days as display relics, and the ordeals endured by their pilots to secure victory in that war.